Hello, welcome back everyone. If you want to make your way in from the coffee break. We are going to get started again, and now we will have a couple of more commercialization-oriented topics. So if you'll remember in previous meetings, we would push all of these to the last day on Friday. But this year, we really wanted to try to integrate these into the meeting because we think these are topics that are important for everyone, not just industry, for researchers, everyone to really be familiar with and engaged. And we're going to start now with talking about advocacy and really the power of advocacy to advance our efforts at bringing focused ultrasound to more patients as quickly as possible. So if you could pull up the slides. I just have a few slides, or maybe I do that. So what is advocacy? So in simple terms, it's communication and action in support of a cause or policy. And with our advocacy efforts, this can include many stakeholders: Congress, HHS, which includes NIH, FDA, CMS, a lot of acronyms, the Department of Defense, Veterans Affairs, and the White House. And what can advocacy do for us and our community? So our big goal is to address the challenges that are currently limiting successful commercialization and widespread patient access to focused ultrasound therapies. And this can mean several things: getting broad support of focused ultrasound as an innovative and transformative treatment for patients, also getting specific support of policies that can break down the barriers to widespread and equitable access to these treatments. And also, more importantly, to a lot of you in the room, is getting more federal funding for focused ultrasound research. So we've identified 3 big barriers to focused ultrasound advancement and broad adoption. And these are really the lack of awareness. So we all know that most people still don't know about focused ultrasound. So the lack of awareness and its potential, particularly among policymakers and funding agencies. And then what we've heard about earlier, and Jeff Martha mentioned this in his talk as well, is the importance of insurance coverage, reimbursement. Well, there's still a lack of insurance and reimbursement for even FDA-approved focused ultrasound treatments, and that's really limiting patient access to promising therapies. And finally, we could all use more research funding to advance innovative new focused ultrasound treatments, particularly, we think, for conditions that are prevalent in some of our veterans and service members. So we'll talk more about some of our efforts, and a lot of these have been targeted around the VA and DOD and some of those other agencies. And so our key messages have been, 1, about research, increasing the funding for focused ultrasound research through the NIH, the VA, and the DOD. We recently held a webinar with G2G, who you'll meet, about the CDMRP program, the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, which is through DOD. They offer a lot of grants, so that's something we want you all to be aware of. And then access, enabling timely reimbursement of focused ultrasound so that all patients get access to this treatment. And that would be, obviously through private insurance, through Medicare, but also through TRICARE, the VA as well. And then finally, education, just raising the awareness of the power and the promise of focused ultrasound. And so here I'm just show all of our various partners, several of whom are represented on this stage. These are, consultants, advocacy organizations, of course, partnering with the key federal agencies, as well as some other more specific organizations as well. And just a few highlights before I introduce you to our panel and we dive into the discussion. The Focused Ultrasound Foundation and the Medical Imaging and Technology Alliance, MITA, have partnered to host several fly-in events. We held 2 on Capitol Hill prior to COVID, and then 1 virtual fly-in post-COVID. And these have been great awareness-building events where focused ultrasound patients, physicians, industry, MITA, and foundation staff have all talked to policymakers and their staffers about focused ultrasound and advocate for its advancement as well as some specific policies. And then the foundation and GTG Consulting, who are represented here as well, hosted a virtual briefing this past February, and this was for education of congressional leaders and their staff. And this was very well attended and I think was a great introduction to many about, again, the promise of focused ultrasound. We also, back prior to the world changing forever, we held a reimbursement summit with AdvaMed, who are a medical device trade association. And that was great as well, to really talk with some of the companies that have FDA-approved devices about how to advance reimbursement. And just in general, our efforts are ongoing with numerous Capitol Hill meetings, federal appropriations requests, comments on draft federal policies, blog posts, op-eds. We have active public relations and social media campaigns. And all of this is ongoing, and we really want all of you to get involved in any way that you're interested. So we definitely want to talk about that more today, as well as how to get involved. And just sort of an aside that I didn't fail to mention is, at this point, our advocacy efforts are primarily focused on the U.S. And so when we're talking about reimbursement at this stage, we're really talking about reimbursement here in the U.S. So that's just something to be aware of. And I think that is it for the slides. So now I want to introduce you to our panelists. So we have a great group with us here. We have Noah Phillip from Brown, and you heard from him earlier in the psychiatric disease panel. We have Patrick Hope here from MIDA. I mentioned MIDA. We've been a partner with them since 2018, and they've been really great in our partnership at raising awareness for focused ultrasound. And we have Katie Collins from GTG Consulting. Her colleague Liz Powell is also here in the audience, and they have a booth. Definitely want you to talk to them about just, in addition to our advocacy efforts, they're also just great at getting involved with various different companies and helping you. And we have a one-pager about advocacy at their booth, which I would encourage you all to pick up, which is, again, how you can become an advocate for focused ultrasound. So now I just want to give each of our and sorry, Hugo, sorry, I forgot. Hugo Imbert is online, and he is with EDAP, and he has been really engaged in our advocacy efforts through our MIDA group. So I'm glad that he could join as well. So actually, I will start with Hugo, and I just want to give each of our panelists the opportunity to briefly introduce themselves and for their organizations, for those of you who are in the advocacy groups, but describe how you have so far been engaged in our advocacy efforts. So I'll start with you, Hugo.
Yes, thanks, Jessica, and hello, everyone. Sorry of not being there in person, but I should be able to join you towards the end of the week. So unfortunately, I couldn't make the trip today from Austin, Texas, where I'm based. So our company is actually headquartered in France, but for a few years we've had a lot of activity in the US, where I moved about 5 years ago. And I was really involved in everything related to FDA clearance of our prostate product, and a lot in the reimbursement. And this is where I had the opportunity to get involved with some of the advocacy initiatives with Jessica, the foundation, the MIDA. Participated in a couple of the fly-ins that Jessica was mentioning. And really I'm always happy to be part of those programs and initiatives. I think we still have a lot of work to do to make the general public aware of focused ultrasound and the potential focused ultrasound as a non-invasive therapy for a lot of different pathologies, and yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done in that field, and that's about it for my introduction. I'm happy to be part of this panel of some of my esteemed colleagues.
Thank you, Hugo. Now, Katie, would you like to introduce yourself in G2G?
Sure. Thanks, Jessica. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see your faces this afternoon. I'm Katie Collins. I'm with G2G Consulting, and we've had the pleasure of working with the Focused Ultrasound Foundation over the past several years on their advocacy efforts with the federal government, whether that's White House, agencies, Congress, et cetera. So excited to talk to you about those efforts today and hopefully to get you involved because every voice counts. My background is in health policy. I spent about 6 years in the Obama-Biden White House, finishing up that time as part of the original Cancer Moonshot Task Force. Stayed with Team Biden to help set up the Biden Cancer Initiative, and was there for several years where I focused on data, standards, sharing in clinical trials, and then moved over to work on congressional advocacy for the National Institutes of Health, and the importance of research funding like we're going to talk about today. So it's nice to see you all.
Thanks, Katie. Patrick?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. If you can hear me okay. For those that are here and watching online, I'm Patrick Hope. I'm the Executive Director of MIDA, the Medical Imaging and Technology Alliance. We've been in a partnership with Focused Ultrasound Foundation since 2018. I think this is my third symposium that I've been through. And I think one of the facets that MIDA offers to the foundation and manufacturers and patients and providers so we can be most helpful is just as an advocacy organization, as a trade association of the medical imaging industry, we represent 90% of the entire medical imaging market. So whether we're developing a standard or have a position up on Capitol Hill or the regulators or the reimbursement people, you can bet that you have the full weight of the entire industry behind you. And so I think that's the value that MIDA can bring when we're going to the Hill or when we're meeting with policymakers, that MIDA supports this effort to make sure that reimbursement and coverage and reimbursement is part of the equation. And it just brings us with a stronger voice. And so I'm excited to be here to, of course, encourage you to take part in that effort because it really is important that we have your involvement. Advocacy is a contact sport. And we need, whether it's your patients or as a provider, as a manufacturer, you have the best stories to tell that we can relate to the regulators and the policymakers of how important this technology is to get into the patients. Thank you all for having me. Look forward to it.
Yeah, so thank you. So just to put on a slightly different hat from earlier, I'm still a psychiatrist, but the role here really has been involved in one of the earlier congressional briefings that we did this year. And I come to this really to share with you folks that this, even though Focused Ultrasound has tremendous potential, it's not really known in the outside world. And as a scientist and as someone who serves on study sections and does research, we really are positioned in a position where we can advocate for new technologies to be considered seriously. And when these things do come across our desks, can really make sure that the best research is being represented using these new and emerging technologies. So I work for the VA. I should say I'm not here on VA time, because I am a federal government employee. But I think there's a tremendous need, particularly speaking of the clinical needs for our veterans and service members, that is dramatically underserved. And I think there's an interest in these agencies to help find new ways to help folks. And there's a tremendous untapped potential there.
And so maybe sticking on that theme about, veterans and our service members. So I wanted Katie to speak to some of the efforts that we've been engaging with G2G in this vein. And we can also tie in how important it is for all of you researchers who are looking for funding to look beyond, the traditional NIH and even some of the basic DoD funding that you may know about, but like getting into the weeds of some of the programs that are out there. But what we're trying to do, I think with G2G, both on the funding stream realm as well as the coverage, potentially coverage for patients. So Katie, can you speak to some of our efforts?
Yeah, and I think I'll go off the VA DoD population side first. As everyone in this room likely knows, there are so many uses of focused ultrasound that really align with the needs of our veterans and our warfighters, whether that's pain, the various psychiatric and PTSD uses, cancer, et cetera. That's a huge population of patients in the United States, so making sure one, that DoD and VA are well aware and educated about those therapies, and we have a wonderful advocate at this table who's been part of those efforts, but also that coverage is provided through TRICARE and through the VA health system so that our veterans and warfighters do have practical access to those technologies is hugely, hugely important. So that's part of the awareness, education, kind of coverage trifecta as it relates to our service members and our veterans. And as to funding, DoD is a huge funder of medical research. We do often kind of get blinded by NIH and everything they have to offer, but CDMRP, the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, is a huge funding opportunity with funding lines for many, many diseases that are applicable to focused ultrasound, and something that we're really trying to encourage this community to apply to be involved with as a peer reviewer. So there is more focused ultrasound experience on that reviewer level, but also for the folks within the CDMRP program to be aware of the technology, for it to be familiar, so it doesn't get bypassed by something that might be otherwise a little more comfortable. So that's a big funding line that I think we need to be looking at and taking advantage of for research in this space.
Great. And I wanted to ask Hugo, since you've been involved in a lot of our efforts with MIDA over the past several years, why you think it's so important for you as, you know, a member of industry to be involved in these efforts, and maybe what have you gotten out of it, or what has the company gotten out of it that you would encourage others to join?
Yeah, it's a good but complicated question. There are a lot of moving parts in trying to get through this commercial phase. Reimbursement is a huge component. It's a very complicated process with a lot of hurdles along the path. I always thought that some of those initiatives could work as a speed trap. Maybe we can find solution talking to the right person, because a lot of the time it's just a question of misunderstanding. People don't really understand the technology. People don't really understand the added value of the technology. And by default, you were talking about the VA, for example, by default, any new technology is placed on a no-pay list. And it's just a matter of, first of all, understanding what that means, understanding how to change this, and try to find some help. And this is where putting our strengths together and collaborating as a group with the foundation, with MIDA, has proven to maybe not solve all the problems, unfortunately, not yet, but at least provide some context, provide some help, and some understanding of the ecosystem of reimbursement and how the policies are made and how you can influence on the long term those policies.
Great. And, you know, Patrick, we have been working together with MIDA and several of the focused ultrasound companies for several years now. So I wonder if you could just speak a little bit more to that partnership, what you think, you know, has been the biggest success, and then also some of the key policies that are kind of going on right now, some of the key policy issues that are relevant to our community.
Sure. You know, I said at the outset that advocacy is a contact sport. If you did nothing, if you did no involvement in this, it would probably take 40 years for you to, or longer, for you to get reimbursement and coverage. And that's why advocacy is so important that you make sure you make the case to the regulators to approve the device, but then you move towards the CMS and coverage and reimbursement to make sure that it's covered and reimbursed. And that's what I think we can offer through the advocacy aspect, and that's why it's so important to talk to policymakers. What MIDA offers is, as I mentioned earlier, is this idea that you've got the entire industry in support of what you're advocating for. So when we go in there and talk about reimbursement for all of our industry, whether it's CT or MRI or X-ray, we make sure that Focus Ultrasound is part of that comment letter to CMS. Same goes with the regulators at FDA as well. When we're going on Capitol Hill, we do the exact same thing. But one of the things that I think is most relevant when we meet with policymakers on Capitol Hill is the stories. And we talked about the fly-in already and how important that is. And we like to try to do those on an annual basis because we've got a lot of different caucus, a lot of disease-specific caucuses that have a specific interest in an area. And having conversations with those policymakers, not so much from the industry's perspective, but more so from the patient to tell their story, how they got access to this, how they paid out of pocket in order to get this life-saving treatment, and why it's so important to them and their recovery and their outcome. The other thing that we do with those patient stories is that if you have a patient story, we have a PR firm that we work directly with that can help message that story in the best possible way, no matter who we're talking to. So we can talk to letters to the editor for your local town newspaper, or a bigger op-ed type piece for a bigger paper. We can go to Capitol Hill, whether you do fly-ins or you do a briefing, or we could do different type of virtual meetings like this. It's the way to spread the word, to educate the public about the importance of this innovative technology. And we have technologies within MIDA that not just focus ultrasound. We've got some very mature technologies, but we got some very much at their infancy stage as well. And everywhere in between. We work with AI companies, we work with pet companies, and they're at different stages of their maturity. And I think what we can offer there is to have that perspective and that background, that you have the support of the entire industry at your back to help you accomplish your goal.
Great. And I also just want to encourage all of you, you can submit, those of you online, you can submit questions via the Q&A function. You can do that if you're in the room as well, or you can come up to the microphones if you have any questions, so please feel free to do so. Back to you, Noah. Are there, if we're thinking again about research funding, which is so critical, I know you have been successful at getting funding through CDMRP, some other things. I just wonder if you have tips, if you have I don't know, just words of wisdom to impart to the community about how to look for some of these other funding opportunities?
Right. So I think, without giving away all of my secrets,
Tell us everything.
tell you exactly. Well, so truth of the matter is, and actually really to echo something that's been said, the thing that sells the best, right? So there's a number of different audiences, and you have to understand which people are listening to what you have to say. Right? And sometimes you're writing a good grant for a study section, and that's a very, very specific kind of communication. That said, one of the more powerful ways once you move outside of the study section is bringing your patients in with you, having videos, having testimonials, having those kinds of discussions, because those are the stories that once you move outside of the science, those are the stories that move people's minds and move how they think about things. So as you have participants and as you have patients come through, we do ask folks if they're willing to engage with us and keep communicating with what we do. We also, one of the things that we do at our VA in Providence is that we involve veterans at the earliest stages of our project development. And we say, here's this idea. This is what I think will be helpful. What do you think? What matters to you? And then that way we have patient and veteran-centric ideas that start at the very inception of the project. I can't underscore how important that is in terms of, sure, the success of the funding, but also making sure that we're meeting our patients' needs.
I think over the last several years, there have been some interesting policies that have been in the works to try to reduce the lag time between FDA approval and CMS coverage. And I know that several of us in this room, particularly with our efforts at MIDA, have really been advocating for something that was called the MCIT pathway, which is now defunct, but there's something potential in the works. I don't know, Patrick, if you can speak to what you know about this potential pathway that CMS is working on to reduce that lag time.
Yeah, so that is something that I think is really relevant and for you to consider. It did have a different name, and it was under the Trump administration, were very successful in getting this at the top of their radar screen. In fact, we had a board meeting. At our board meeting, we had one of the domestic policy advisors from the Trump administration to flag this for them, that this is of interest to a lot of our companies, especially these innovative technology companies. And he took that back to the White House, and he'd been working with CMS and FDA, and it turns out that this is a significant problem for a lot of innovative technologies that are stuck sort of in this sort of no man's land, where they've got their approved device that it's approved to be safe and effective, but there's no reimbursement. And the idea was to streamline that process, to condense the time, which, as you know, can take years, if not longer, from that FDA approval to that CMS coverage and reimbursement. And so it did get introduced under a different name, MCIT, and that was rescinded under the Biden administration for various different reasons. And we've been engaged with of course, Capitol Hill and with the regulators and reimbursement people at CMS to try to revive that. And they have revived it through a different name. It's an emerging technology name. I think it's called TSIP. TSIT is what its name is. And we expect there to be some guidance or a proposed rule that we come out with, or final rule coming out with, maybe at the end of this year or early next year, that'll give us some idea of what products and devices might be covered that will sort of get through that time period in a much faster way, so that you can get towards reimbursement and coverage, because it's really hard to prove if you're not be able to use the product. And so this would speed up that process and allow you to use the product during that interim period.
And that type of a policy, if and when that comes out and it's something that is favorable to our community, that's when we would want to call on all of you to help and support the efforts to make that policy a reality. So Katie, maybe you can speak to when things like that happen, how we want to call on this community.
Yes, absolutely. So I'd like to give a plug for our QR code, which you'll see our table is just outside this room. We'd love to have everybody at this conference sign up to be informed and involved in our advocacy efforts. It really does make a difference, whether it's an individual call or email or letter to your representative or to your senator, or being part of a sign-on letter perhaps that the foundation would do. Your individual voice really matters for them to hear, this is important to me, I am your constituent, we really need to see change. Patrick talked about the individual patient stories, and that's what really sticks with policymakers. It's not always a statistic or a fact, but really hearing about an innovation that you're driving forward, or a patient story, about how this particular therapy changed my life. That really makes a difference in changing policy. So we'd love to have all of your voices as a part of that. We really are stronger when we're all together.
I think that's really important. We would definitely want to have all of you involved. Hugo, I think maybe you can also speak to, and I know I recognize it's pretty specific, but some of the challenges that you all had in the prostate HIFU space for getting a more favorable payment level from Medicare, and kind of how you how advocacy was how you used advocacy in trying to get that changed, and how you called on the foundation and partners, and just as a more specific, albeit pretty granular example, but of one type of thing that we can do collectively as a community that may be better than just going it all alone as individual companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I'm not sure companies or researchers appreciate how difficult and how much time it takes to go from I got the FDA clearance or approval and my procedure is reimbursed. This is definitely something we as a company had underestimated. And we realized this, and when we met some consultants that explained to us that was the death valley of a lot of medical device companies. That even if they reach the holy grail of the FDA clearance, we're not able to get all the way to the real finish line, which is make money by selling your procedure or your device enough to pay back everything you've invested to get it to the market. So that's a long process, and this is where it's extremely essential to have help from others, and the foundation, all those initiatives, talking to other companies, the MIDA for sure. We were lucky to be included in the some of the groups looking at reimbursement with MIDA, and be in the same room as reimbursement experts from larger companies in the medical imaging space. And when our individual and very specific issues came up, so typically you mentioned the payment rate for the HIFU for prostate cancer was dropped by from $7,500 all the way down to $4,000, so divided by 2 nearly, making it impossible for any hospital to offer it without losing money. This is where we were able to get help, to get advice from other companies, from those groups. And when it was time for us to embark on our journey to try to convince CMS that they should increase and put it back to where it was initially, even if at the end of the day it's a game of numbers, at least we spent 2 years with the help of MIDA, with the help of the foundation, with the help of other companies, to file comments, to understand how to try to fast track this. And 2 years later, here we are. We're back to, fingers crossed, if it's confirmed in the final rule in a couple of weeks, we should be back to more decent payment, which will allow us to, will allow the patients, prostate cancer patients in the US, to have access to this therapy without putting down $25,000 of their own money, which is definitely a game changer for everyone. So I really encourage any company that is getting close to this space, or even if they're far away from this time in their history, to engage in those kind of initiatives, at least to listen to what's going on. Listen, and don't hesitate to ask questions, because for sure, people have gone through this. You got a lot of people, a lot of experts that know how those things works, know how the VA system works better than what you can do, know how the CMS system, the proposed rule, the final rule, the physician fee schedule, the hospital outpatient schedule, et cetera, and that's a great resource for this kind of discussion and this kind of issues.
Great. Yeah. So it takes a lot, but at least in there's some small examples of us having some success working together on this. I think when we're talking about access, we're always talking about equitable access for all of our patients. So being a clinician, being a psychiatrist, Noah, I wonder if you could just speak to, whether it's clinical trials or then treating patients. Obviously, you've treated a lot of patients for depression and other other psychiatric disorders, how important it is to really get these treatments to the finish line where we have this equitable access, where we're not just, some patients are getting it because of being able to pay out of pocket or whatever, but how important this is to you as a clinician to be able to treat all patients.
Right. So for those of us who are clinicians and researchers too in the room, I mean, the reason we got into this was to help people get better. And that is a passion that you can't fake. And that is something that clearly comes across when we're communicating with those folks who are in these advocacy spaces. And one of the thought exercises I always like to have with people when I'm speaking to them and thinking about depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress, but particularly depression, is I ask the question, so what if depression was cancer? And how would our world look if the leading cause of disability was funded in the same way as other things that rob people of their lives and livelihoods? And to engage the people with whom that you're speaking in that shared process and in that shared thought. And to your equity point, right, in equitable access, there are no shortage of people who don't have access to what they need from a healthcare perspective. And one of the challenges that we have is that we have an angle to make things more technical and more expensive, and that's not always going to be the way to get the greatest degree of access to our patients. And all of us who are in this technology development space need to be thinking really carefully about that, and in terms of making sure that the things we're developing are going to be deployable in the way that we would want them to. From a company's perspective, I would imagine that would allow much greater access to a market. And certainly from a physician and treater's perspective, that makes sure that we can get the treatments where we need them to go, both in the US and beyond.
Great. And now I think again, if we have any questions, please feel free to ask, but I think otherwise, I just want to give each of our panelists the opportunity to say some final thoughts. Maybe I'll start with you, Katie.
Yeah, sure. I think one thing to think about if you're considering lending your voice to advocacy and contributing is that we really are at a time with our government where I think we are ripe for some changes in a positive direction. Congress and policymakers across the administration and federal government, I think, are beginning to understand transformative and cross-cutting technologies like focused ultrasound. It's really a focus of the current administration, and I think COVID, which is a bit of a different thing, but has really brought healthcare into a new prioritized lens. So I think we're at a time when our advocacy can really make a difference because the audience is receptive. You may have heard the government is in the midst of establishing a new agency, ARPA-H, which will be a DARPA-esque model for investing in high risk, high reward research, go big or go home, which is really exciting and is going to be a new pot of money. They are focused on non-body part specific, again, cross-cutting technologies, so something to be thinking about and keeping your ears open. The foundation will certainly be keeping you updated as that unfolds, but I think there's some new promising things happening, so again, please sign up. We'd love to be involved with you and really give a greater voice to this very important technology.
Great.
Yeah, and I agree with Katie 100%. The title of this program is Why Advocacy? This is the right time to do advocacy. And I'll tell you, the formula is very basic. If you want coverage and reimbursement, that equals your pathway to market, to get your product into the hands of providers who can benefit the patients who need it the most. And so from the advocacy's perspective, it's really important that you engage. If you're from industry, if you're a manufacturer, join our effort with the Focus Ultrasound Foundation. At MIDA, we have a Focus Ultrasound section or committee that meets as industry. But make sure you get your information to the foundation so that when we go up to Capitol Hill, when we are trying to message different patient aspects, whether it's in a PR campaign or a letter to the editor or an op-ed, let us have your information, know who to talk to so that we can spread the information, educate the public far and wide about the importance of that. We'll get the attention of your congressperson. It's really important that you engage with them and doing that through the foundation. And the last thing, just a shameless plug, is we do have a vacancy for our Focus Ultrasound lobbyist. And so if you have a passion for Focus Ultrasound, which you must or you wouldn't be here, and you understand a little bit about government relations, please contact me. Jessica has my information. This is one way that you can make a real difference directly by engaging with policymakers to make a difference for Focus Ultrasound, because we have a product out there that's maybe our best kept secret, and it's important that we get this into the hands of providers and patients.
Thanks.
Can I add in one more thing? You never know if your location, your zip code could be the key to getting a legislator interested, which is why it's so important that we, I think, have the information of everybody here, because it could be your voice that tells the story to the right person that makes somebody say, you know, I want to change this policy, I want to write a bill. It really does make a difference.
Yeah, and I was just going to pick up on that, which is really important. So, you know, obviously, we want to know if you already have relationships with your members of Congress or your senators, or you want to talk to them about what you're doing. If you have a research site or a company manufacturing facility and you want those members of Congress to come for a site visit, these are all things that we can help facilitate, and then they would be really great for, again, raising awareness about what we're doing and building champions, because that's what we're trying to do, is build these policymakers as champions so that when these policies are being developed and we need them to support things that will help our community, they're already kind of ripe for that. So that's really important. So now, Noah, if you want to give us a few final thoughts.
Yes, so I think that for those of us who are involved in science and patient care, sometimes scientific communication isn't our strength. The nice thing is that there are easy ways to learn how to do it, and I'd really encourage you to do so. It's a low-hanging fruit, right? So being involved in understanding and using social media, being involved, sending your local congressman a press release or something along that line really does go a long way. And really to be involved. From the science side, the ways that we can advocate are doing the best science that we can, the most rigorous work that we can, and being champions of good, rigorous, and safe practice. And really to be thinking about that as we do what we do on a day-to-day basis, recognizing that this is an early stage of this technology, and we want to be very mindful and thoughtful about success. And the last thing I just want to come back to is just, involve your patients, involve them from the beginning to the end, and keep them involved in that process because they can be partners in the advocacy.
Great. And Hugo, any final last thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to, on a very personal level, to share some of my experience doing those fly-ins. I was really not expecting meeting those people that I met, whether they're patients or even some of the staff members that we met that were extremely interested in the story we were telling, and especially when the patients were telling the story. And for me, who's been involved in some of the research and then the development of our technology and then the launch and then all this, sometimes I felt like I lost track of what we're really doing, and being with those patients they were really engaged and explaining how life-changing that was for them. I remember very well an essential tremor patient that had been treated with Focus Ultrasound and explaining to Ted Cruz. You were there, Jessica. I have the picture just down there behind me.
I was also very pregnant. Remember that?
You were very, very pregnant. But I remember that discussion, and even if Ted Cruz was really busy and had a lot of other things to do, just we spent a lot of time talking to him, and the patient were so. I don't know how to express this, but for me, being there, that helped me also remind myself of why I've been doing this all these years. And that's my final comment on this, to encourage everyone to really join those kind of efforts.
Yeah, I agree. It's really powerful to hear the patients tell their stories, and they have a very receptive audience when we're talking to members of Congress and staffers. And I just think in general, as we mentioned, we want you to let us know, visit G2G's booth. We have the QR code. We want you to get involved in our advocacy. We want you to pick up the one-pager. And we just want you to talk to us about how we can better serve you. Obviously, for those of you in industry, you have a great partner in Emily White, who's back there, and you all know her. And so please feel free to tell her what you would better need from us that are in this realm of regulatory reimbursement. Talk to me, and we just want to hear what your challenges are and where the sticking points are for you, and then try to figure out how we, in partnership with our great consultants and organizations here, can really help you move things forward and get focused ultrasound to more patients more quickly. So thank you all. We're a few minutes early, which I think is important because we're going to have to do some rearranging of the stage here for our next discussion. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you back here in a few minutes.